Last week, a Chinese jet dropped flares in front of an Australian Air Force plane over the South China Sea. The J-16 jet reportedly came within 30 meters of the P-8A Poseidon surveillance aircraft before releasing flares directly into its path. There were no injuries, and the Australian jet returned undamaged, but the incident led to an exchange of accusations between the two governments. Canberra accused the Chinese military of dangerous behaviour, calling the jet's actions unsafe and unprofessional. In response, Beijing accused the Australian government of spreading false narratives and stirring up trouble. So what really happened? And more importantly, what does this tell us about the growing tensions between China, Australia, and the West? The first point to note is that China hasn't actually denied any of Australia's claims. They are instead accusing Australia of provoking the incident, arguing the actions of the Chinese jet were legitimate, lawful, professional, and restrained. According to a Chinese Defense Ministry spokesperson, Australia deliberately infringed upon China's rights in the South China Sea and provoked China, yet it was the villain who complained first, spreading false narratives. While not an outright admission, these statements essentially confirm Australia's version of events, but with a caveat. Beijing is accusing the Australian Air Force jet of provoking its fighter into action. But this also shouldn't be surprising. It's a tactic frequently used by Chinese aircraft on the US and its allies, and there's plenty of footage of these types of incident. In fact, the video of a similar altercation between identical aircraft was released by China in a propaganda film, boasting of dropping flares and chaff into the plane's path. Other recent incidents include Chinese jets dropping flares in front of a Philippine transport plane in August 2024 over the Scarborough Shoal, as well as other dangerous maneuvers such as buzzing US aircraft in international airspace. These actions are generally referred to as grey zone tactics, aggressive and coercive operations that achieve various geopolitical and military objectives without reaching the threshold of armed conflict or war. So why has China felt the context justified its actions in its recent incident with Australia? At its core, this all comes down to control of the South China Sea. Australia and its neighbours follow standard practice and international law in interpreting the boundaries of international waters and territorial claims. China, on the other hand, asserts ownership over essentially the entire South China Sea and wants to prevent other countries from entering what it believes to be its waters and airspace. It's for this reason that it's employed these grey zone tactics, like dropping flares and ramming ships, to intimidate countries into accepting its territorial claims, even without the backing of international law. It's also for this reason that countries like Australia and the US routinely send ships through these contested waters and airspace to push back against these Chinese claims. Whether one then sees the actions of Australia or the Chinese as reasonable comes down to which territorial claims are seen as correct. Ultimately, however, the victor will not be determined by international law or negotiations, but whoever is willing to use more force. This is why the Philippines has made a big show of confronting Chinese boats within its exclusive economic zone in recent months, and why the new US administration has immediately begun a series of drills and patrols with allies in the Indo-Pacific. How China will respond to this changing dynamic, and whether the US will be more proactive in responding to aggression towards its regional allies, are questions we will learn the answers to in the coming months.